Hello everyone and welcome to your free Ornament Girl tutorial. My name is Kennedy and in this video I'll be showing you how to create the fancy frame ornament. The fancy frame ornament pattern was designed by Tammy and it is perfect for showing off large fussy cut images at the center, or you can use a plain color in the background and show off your favorite charms. Make sure you check out the Ornament Girl supply shop for lots of adorable charm and fabric options like the ornaments you see here. Also be sure to check out the link below the video to get your free printable supply list, which will break down all of the materials and fabric cuts you'll need for this ornament, as well as clickable links that will make shopping for your materials super easy. A quick reminder before we get started, this pattern, along with all Ornament Girl patterns, is copyrighted and it's illegal to teach it without our permission. If you have a friend who you think would love to make this ornament, be sure to send them the link to this free tutorial. In order to create the fancy frame ornament, you will need a soft foam ball marked with 8 lines, satin straight pins, fabric, embellishments, and some ornament making tools. You can check out the free printable supply list linked below the video to get a breakdown of all of these materials, and that will also take you to the embellishment library on the Ornament Girl website, which gives you lots of different embellishing ideas. But if you have some 3/8 inch wide ribbon and some beads handy, I'll show you how to add those few simple embellishments to your ornament in this tutorial. Once all of your tools and materials are gathered, we can begin creating your fancy frame ornament. In order to create the fancy frame ornament, you will need a soft foam ball that is marked into 8 segments. I'm using a pre-marked soft foam ball from the Ornament Girl supply shop that comes with these 8 segment lines already added to the foam. But if you're using a plain foam ball, you can check out the foam marking library on the Ornament Girl website for a tutorial on how to divide your ball into 8 segments. And then in addition to those 8 segment lines, you will also have the equator line running around the center of the ball where the 2 halves meet. I'm just going to trace this line on my foam ball because that makes it much easier for me to see as I'm creating my ornament. So I'm just tracing that equator line all the way around. And once we have the equator and the 8 segment lines marked, we can start by adding our base square. The base square will be made up with a 3-inch square of fabric number 1. This can either be a fussy cut fabric image, so as you can see, I cut my fabric so that this poinsettia flower is right in the center so that it will be shown at the center of my ornament. Or you could use a more plain piece of fabric or something that doesn't have a specific pattern in the center, and you could choose to embellish the center of your ornament later. Either way, you will take that 3-inch square and hold it with the pattern side facing away from you, and then fold it in half from top to bottom, but do your best not to crease that fold. We're just putting the raw edges together. And now you're going to fold it in half the opposite way, again, doing your best not to crease the fold. The only point you want to crease is this corner where all of the folded edges meet up. So you're just going to give that a little pinch. And then you're going to open this up, and right at that center point where you pinched, there should be some fold lines that intersect and mark the very center of your fabric square. You're going to pin down through the pattern side right at the center point of the fabric. And now you're going to pin this into the pole marking. The pole marking is the point on either side of your ball where all of the segment lines converge at one point. You're just going to press that pin right into the pole marking. And now we just need to line up your image if you have one on your fabric. If you want your image to sit in line with one of the fabric points from the next layers, you will center your image with a segment line. If you would rather have it sitting between the fabric points, you'll center your image within the segment. And you don't have to be too fussy about this. You only need to worry about that if you have a very specific preference on where that image sits on the finished ornament. And once you have it lined up, you are going to smooth the fabric out over the ball by tugging on all 4 corners and pinning them in place. And you do want to stretch your fabric a little bit so that it lays nice and smooth and it doesn't ripple up once we start pinning other pieces on top of it. Now you can go ahead and smooth down each of the 4 sides and add an additional pin to hold each of those down. And with that, the base square is complete and we are ready to move on to layer 1. Layer 1 is made up of basic triangle folds made from 2x3" rectangles of fabric number 2. Hold your rectangle horizontally with the pattern side facing away from you and fold the top edge down by about 3/8 to 1/4 of an inch and crease that fold, but you don't have to be exact about that measurement. You just want it to be a small amount. Fold the piece in half crosswise from left to right and crease to find the center. Unfold that fold, and now you should have a crease running down the center of the fabric. You're going to pin along that center crease just a hair below the top folded edge of the fabric piece. Now each of these pieces for this layer will be pinned along the segment lines, and the segment lines are partially covered by the base square, but you can find them lower on the ball and then follow them up to the pole marking. And you're going to use a flexible tape measure to measure directly along the segment line. So I'm measuring from the pin at the center of the ornament, making sure that the long edge of my tape measure is directly along one of the lines on the foam. And then I'm going to pin my prepped piece at the 3/4 inch mark. So 3/4 of an inch below the pole marking, directly along the segment line. Go ahead and push your pin into place. And now we can create the basic triangle fold. To do this, you will pinch the left half of the fabric and fold it straight down. Then pinch the right half and fold it straight down, just overlapping the left side a tiny bit, just enough that you could use one pin at the bottom center to hold both halves in place. And you also want to adjust this to make sure that the center line of your triangle is directly in line with the segment line on the foam. So we're going to use those lines to keep everything lined up. Once you have your triangle centered over the segment line, pin at the bottom center to hold both halves in place, and then smooth out the left and right corners. And as you smooth, you can also smooth the base square out underneath it to help reduce any bubbling. And then pin the left and right edges in place. I'm going to keep these pins about 1/4 of an inch above the equator line. Our next 2 layers will be pinned right along the equator, so it's good to keep these pins out of the way a little bit. Now I'm going to smooth the right half out and pin that edge in place, keeping the pin about 1/4 of an inch above the equator. And with that, you have added your very first basic triangle fold of layer 1. Let's go ahead and prep our next piece. With another 2x3 inch rectangle of fabric number 2, hold this with the pattern side facing away from you horizontally. Fold the top edge down by about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch and crease. Fold in half crosswise and crease to find the center. Unfold and pin along that center crease just a hair below the top folded edge of the piece. And this is how you are going to prep the fabric pieces for layers 1, 2, and 3. So if I say go ahead and prep your next piece, you will be following those exact same steps. And now we're going to move to the right of the piece we just placed. So here's the piece we just added. We're finding the very next segment line that is to the right of that, and we're just going to follow the exact same steps. So measuring down from the pin at the pole marking, directly along the segment line on the foam, pin along the segment line at the 3/4 inch mark, and now you can create your basic triangle fold, folding the left half straight down and the right half straight down, just overlapping the left, making sure that the center line of the triangle sits in line with the segment line on the foam. Pin at the bottom center, and we're keeping these pins about 1/4 of an inch above the equator. Smooth out the left and right sides, and now you are overlapping the previous piece, and that's totally okay. Pin those left and right sides in place about 1/4 inch above the equator. Now you've completed your second basic triangle fold. Go ahead and prep another piece of fabric in the exact same way. Once you have prepped that next piece of fabric, we're going to move to the right to that next segment line. And by now, I'm sure you've got these steps down. You're going to measure from the pole marking along the segment line, pin directly along the segment line at the 3/4 inch mark, and create that basic triangle fold, keeping the center of your triangle directly in line with the segment line on the foam. And you also want to look and make sure that these points are pretty consistent. If your triangles were off center, your points between triangles would look pretty different in length and size. So you just want to make sure that you're creating a consistent outline with the edges of your triangles, and continue to pin them in place at the bottom center and the left and right edges, keeping those pins about 1/4 inch above the equator so that it doesn't gather too much bulk in this first layer. Repeat those exact same steps, moving to the right each time until you've added a basic triangle fold to all 8 segment lines on the foam. In this pattern, the overlapping points don't show on the final ornament, so you don't need to worry about moving any triangles out of the way when you're adding your last triangle. So go ahead and continue adding triangles until you've completed these steps along all 8 segment lines. Once you've added all 8 triangles, your ornament will look something like this. And now you can remove the pin from the center of the base square. And if that pin left a hole in the fabric, you can use the tip of the pin to scratch those fabric fibers back into place to help hide that fabric hole. And now you can just use your fabric scissors to trim away the extra fabric extending beyond the equator. You don't want to trim super high up on the ornament, but you just want to trim away this extra fabric so that you can still see that equator line as you add the next layer. Once that is all trimmed up, layer 1 is complete and we can move on to layer 2. Layer 2 is made up of basic triangle folds made from 2x3 inch rectangles of fabric number 3. You're going to prep these in the exact same way as the pieces for the previous layer. Hold your rectangle horizontally with the pattern side facing away from you and fold the top edge over by about 1/4 to 3/8 inch and crease that fold. Fold in half crosswise and crease to find the center. Unfold and pin along that center crease just a hair below the top folded edge. And now for this layer, you have options of where you want to pin. So you're going to be pinning along the segment line directly below the tip of the previous layer, but you can move this fabric piece up or down depending on how much of layer 1 you want to show. So for example, on this ornament, I pinned these triangles 3/8 inch below layer 1, so I have a little bit thinner outline from layer 1 here. I think on the ornament I'm creating now, I want to show more of that red fabric, so I'm going to measure down by 1/2 inch. You can pick whichever measurement you prefer. You could do a really skinny outline by pinning at 1/4 inch. You could come below 1/2 inch if you wanted to. But you just want to be consistent all the way around. So once you pick that measurement, make sure you stick with it for every piece. I'm going to be pinning directly along the segment line, which is also the center line of the layer 1 triangle at the 1/2 inch mark. And now I'm going to create a basic triangle in the exact same way, folding the left half straight down and the right half straight down, just overlapping the left and making sure that the center line of my triangle lines up with the segment line on the foam. And then I'm going to pin that in place at the bottom center and the left and right edges, this time keeping my pins just above that equator line. So I'm pinning just a little bit above the equator. And that is how you're going to add all of the pieces for this layer. So go ahead and prep your next piece of fabric in the exact same way. And moving directly to the right of the piece you just placed, you're just going to repeat the exact same steps. So using whichever measurement you decided to go with, I picked 1/2 inch. I'm going to measure down from the tip of the basic triangle from layer 1, measuring directly along the segment line. Pin at the 1/2 inch mark or whatever measurement you used previously. You want to stay consistent with that. Create your basic triangle fold, folding the left half straight down and the right half straight down. Make sure the center line is directly along the segment line. And then pin at the bottom center and the left and right edges, keeping those pins directly above the equator line. Go ahead and repeat those exact same steps to add a basic triangle fold to all 8 segment lines on the foam, making sure to keep your measurement from the previous layer consistent with every piece and keep your pins right above the equator line on the foam. Once you've added all 8 basic triangles, your ornament will look like this, and now you can carefully trim away the fabric extending beyond the equator line. And once that is all trimmed up, layer 2 is complete and we just have one more layer left to add. Layer 3 is made up of prism folds made from 2 by 3 inch rectangles of fabric number 4. Even though these are different folds, we will still be prepping the fabric pieces just like the basic triangles. So hold the rectangle horizontally with the pattern side facing away from you. Fold the top edge down by about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch and crease that fold. Fold in half crosswise and crease to find the center. Unfold and pin along the center crease just a hair below the top folded edge. And we don't need to do any measuring for this layer because we're just going to pin these right at the points where the layer 1 triangles intersect. So my red fabric here, right where those pieces come down to make a point, I'm going to pin my prepped piece directly at that point. And now we can create a prism fold. Pinch the left half and fold it down toward the right on an angle. Then pinch the right half and fold it down toward the left, coming just a little bit past this left edge. And now you've created a narrow triangle shape, and you can swivel this on the pin to make sure that it sits centered within the segment on the foam and also centered between these triangles. You don't want it off center where you're getting a different amount of the triangles on each side. You want it to create a symmetrical outline on the left and right sides, and then you're going to pin the left and right edges in place, being sure to keep these pins right above that equator line, which is marked by where your fabric is trimmed and your pins are placed in the previous layer. And that is how you're going to add all of the fabric pieces for this layer. Go ahead and prep another piece of fabric in the exact same way. And now moving to the right of the piece you just placed, pin at the next point where the layer 1 pieces intersect and create your prism fold, folding the left half down to the right and the right half down to the left. And I'm going to show you a little tip here as well. If you wanted to turn this prism fold into a pyramid fold, you would pinch the top layer of fabric and fold it back over to the right, creating this narrow triangle at the center. And that's just going to add another layer of dimension to your ornament. So if you would rather do pyramid folds, you can opt to do all of your pieces as pyramid folds as well. It doesn't change really the measurements or the pieces that you're placing. It just changes the final look, and you'll want to use one pin at the bottom center to hold that in place. So go ahead and smooth this down. Pin at the left and right edges directly in line with the equator. And now you will just continue those exact same steps to add a prism fold or a pyramid fold to the remaining sections where those triangles from layer 1 intersect, so that you're filling all 8 segments with a prism fold or a pyramid fold if you're opting for that extra step. Once you have added all 8 prism folds to your ornament, it will look like this, and all you need to do is trim off the fabric extending beyond the equator. And once that is all trimmed up, side 1 of your fancy frame ornament is complete, and all we need to do is flip the ball over and complete the exact same steps on side 2. I am just going to give you a brief reminder of how to complete each layer, but if you want the more in-depth breakdown of each of the pieces, you can return to the side 1 section of the video and just follow the same steps. But if you just need a quick reminder for each layer, you can stick here with me in the next couple of minutes. You're going to add your base square with a 3-inch square of fabric number 1. Hold this with the pattern side facing away from you and fold it in half twice, doing your best not to crease the folds, and then just pinch the corner where all of the folded edges meet. Unfold and pin down through the pattern side, right at the center point marked by the creases. And now on side 2 of your ornament, you're going to pin this right into the pole marking where all of the segment lines meet up. Now, if you have a fabric image that has a very clear top that you want pointing to the top of the ornament, you'll want to make sure to check that the top of your image on side 1 and side 2 are lined up with the same point. I'm not too worried about this ornament, but for example, on my balloon unicorn here, I wanted to make sure the top of the unicorn was pointing upward on both sides of the ornament. So you'll just want to pay attention to that if you have a specific image on your fabric. Mine is just kind of random here for this square, so I don't need to worry about that. But once you have your fabric lined up, you're going to tug on all 4 corners to smooth the fabric out over the foam and pin them in place, and then do the same for all 4 sides of the fabric as well. Now that the base square is complete, we can add layer 1. Layer 1 is made of basic triangle folds made from rectangles of fabric number 2. Hold your rectangle horizontally with the pattern side facing away from you and fold the top edge down by about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch and crease. Fold in half crosswise and crease to find the center. Unfold and pin along that center crease right below the top folded edge. And these pieces will be pinned along each segment line 3/4 of an inch below the pole marking. So locate one of the segment lines. Measure down from the pin at the center of the base square, measuring with the long edge of the tape measure directly along the segment line, and pin along the line 3/4 of an inch below the top center pin. Now to create the basic triangle fold, pinch the left half and fold it straight down. Then pinch the right half and fold it straight down, just overlapping the left. And you want to line this up with the segment line, but now the segment line is almost completely covered. So instead, you are going to use the center lines of the pieces from side one. So just adjust the center line of your piece so that it's lined right up with the center line of the triangles from side one. Pin at the bottom center and the left and right edges, keeping these pins about 1/4 of an inch above the equator, which is this ridge of fabric trimmed along side one. And that is how you're going to add all of the pieces for this layer. So anytime you're locating a segment line, for example, along this next segment line, I can't see most of the segment line, but I'm going to use these center lines from the triangles on layer one to make sure that I'm measuring directly along that line. So go ahead and repeat those exact same steps to add a basic triangle to all 8 segment lines on the foam, pinned 3/4 of an inch from the center pole marking. Once you have added all 8 basic triangle folds, you can trim away the extra fabric extending below the pins, being very careful not to accidentally cut anything from side one that's already completed. And you can also remove the pin from the center of the ornament and scratch those fabric fibers back into place. And now that you have finished layer one, we can move on to layer two. Layer two is made up of basic triangle folds made from 2 by 3 inch rectangles of fabric number 3. You're going to prep these pieces in the exact same way as you did for the pieces in the previous layer. And remember that for this layer, when you measure down from layer one, you can adjust the distance. So whatever distance you used for layer two on the previous side, I measured down by 1/2 an inch. You want to use that exact same measurement. So measure down from the tip of one of the triangles from the previous layer, pin along the center line at the 1/2 inch mark or at whatever measurement you used for side one. Then create your basic triangle, folding the left half straight down and the right half straight down, just overlapping the left and making sure the center line lines up with the center lines from side one. And then pin at the bottom center and the left and right corners, keeping those pins just a little bit above that equator line. That is how you're going to add all of the pieces for this layer. So repeat those exact same steps to add a basic triangle fold on top of the remaining folds from layer one. Once you've placed all 8 triangles, you are again going to carefully trim away the fabric extending over into side one, but you want to be very careful not to accidentally cut any of those side one fabric pieces. Once that is all trimmed up, layer 2 is complete, and we just have one more layer left to add to complete side 2. Layer 3 is made of prism folds or pyramid folds, whichever you prefer, made from 2 by 3 inch rectangles of fabric number 4. You are going to prep this piece in the exact same way as you did for the basic triangle pieces. And for this layer, we don't need to do any measuring because you are going to pin these pieces at the point where the layer 1 triangles intersect. So pin right at that point between 2 triangles. Now create a prism fold by folding the left half down toward the right and the right half down toward the left. And if you want to create a pyramid fold, you're just going to pinch the top layer and fold it back over to the right to create that additional narrow triangle at the center. Since I did prism folds on side 1, I'm going to stick with those, but you can do either. And then you're just going to pin in place at the left and right edges, making sure that your piece is centered between the triangles and you have an even outline showing on each side. And when you pin the left and right edges in place, make sure that's right above the equator line. Repeat those exact same steps to add a prism fold or a pyramid fold to the remaining intersection points from layer 1. Once you've added all 8 prism folds, go ahead and trim away the extra fabric extending beyond the equator, again being extremely careful that you don't accidentally snip anything from side 1. And once that is all trimmed up, we can now cover the raw edges and pins using a fabric band. With a 2 by 10.5 inch strip of fabric, hold this with the pattern side facing away from you and fold it in thirds lengthwise. You might not be able to fold the entire piece at once, and that's okay. You can just work with a few inches at a time. And then flip this band over so that the long raw edge is facing away from you, and decide where you would like the top of your ornament to be. You can either line it up with the basic triangles or with the prism folds, depending on which orientation you like better. And then you'll lay the band down at the top center of the ornament, covering the raw edges and pins, and use 2 pins along the short end to hold it in place. And then keeping the band folded in thirds, wrap it all the way around the ornament, covering the raw edges and pins as you go. And you want to pull tight enough that the band lays smooth, but not so tightly that the pattern on the fabric becomes distorted. And when you return to the top center, you are again going to use 2 pins to hold it in place. And then you can trim off any extra fabric extending beyond those pins. And now that all of the fabric pieces are added to your ornament, it is time to add some embellishments. You can check out the embellishment library on the Ornament Girl website for lots of embellishment ideas and tutorials, or you can follow along here for a couple simple bow and bead ideas as well. To make the first bow layer, you can start with a 28-inch piece of ribbon, and if you'd like to do the loop and pin method, you can pin through one ribbon end and then loop the ribbon back on that pin. I like to do the gift bow style bow to help keep my loops really consistent. So to do that, you can fold your ribbon in half and cut at the center so that you now have 2 equal pieces of ribbon. And holding those together, you will do that one more time, folding them in half and then cut at the center so that you have 4 equal pieces of ribbon. Now holding those 4 pieces together, fold them in half and pin down through the center point, catching all 4 pieces of ribbon on the pin. And then flip that pin over and spread the ribbon pieces out. And one by one, you can fold each ribbon end back and onto the pin until you've created 8 loops. Once you've created all 8 loops, you can flip that pin over to take a look at the beautiful bow you've made, and then you'll pin this right into the top center of the ornament to add the first bow layer. Now to add 2 more layers on top, I'm going to go ahead and repeat those exact same steps using a 26-inch piece of ribbon followed by a 24-inch piece of ribbon to create those next 2 bows. Once you have created those next 2 bows, you can pin them right on top of the first 2 bows that you placed. And now you have a beautiful fluffy tiered bow to top your ornament. We do have a video that we will link to below that is on our YouTube channel showing you lots of different hanger options for your ornament. So to cover this top center pin and add a perfect way for hanging your ornament, you can check out our hanger video for lots of different options. And now just to finish off the front and back of my ornament, I'm going to use gold sequin pins threaded with beads, and I'm going to pin one at the tip of each of the prism folds. You could add some charms to the center, you could add trim to the band, or lots of different options here. I'm going to stick with the simplicity of adding a bead to each prism fold. Once you've added the embellishments to the front and the back of your ornament, your fancy frame ornament is complete. I hope you really enjoyed following along this tutorial with me. This pattern works up beautifully in lots of different themes and color combinations, and it's a great way to show off your larger print fabrics in the center. I can't wait to see all of the beautiful fancy frame ornaments that you create. If you have any questions, be sure to let us know in the comments below the video, and be sure to subscribe to the Ornament Girl YouTube channel for more free tutorials for beautiful ornaments like this one. Thanks for watching and happy ornamenting!